What if I told you that a single story, whispered by ancient Zen masters, could quiet the storm in your mind tonight? Over the next 3 hours, you're about to hear tales so profound that emperors abandoned their thrones just to understand them. If it feels right, let us know where you're listening from. There's something beautiful about hearts finding peace together across the globe. Settle in with whatever brings you comfort. These aren't just stories, they're 1,000-year-old medicines for modern anxiety, handed down through generations of wise teachers who discovered the secret to unshakable inner calm. Your journey to deep peace begins now. In ancient Japan, during a time when the old ways were crumbling and new ideas flooded in from the West, there lived a Zen master whose name was Nan-in. This was the Meiji era, beginning in 1868, when Japan opened its doors to the world after centuries of isolation. Emperors were losing power, samurai were laying down their swords, and everything that once seemed permanent was changing like leaves in autumn wind. Yet in this chaos, people still sought wisdom. A university professor, his mind buzzing with Western philosophy and scientific theories, came to visit Nan-in. He had heard whispers of something called Zen, a way of understanding that went beyond books and lectures. Nan-in welcomed him with a gentle smile and began preparing tea. The professor, unable to contain his excitement, immediately launched into a detailed explanation of his studies, his theories about consciousness, his interpretations of Eastern philosophy. Words poured from him like water from a broken dam. Nan-in listened patiently, nodding occasionally as he lifted the teapot. He poured tea into the professor's cup slowly, mindfully. The cup filled to the brim, but Nan-in kept pouring. Tea spilled over the edges, pooling on the wooden table, dripping onto the floor. The professor watched in growing alarm. "Master, stop. The cup is overflowing. No more tea can possibly fit." Nan-in set down the teapot and looked directly into the professor's eyes. "Like this cup," he said gently, "you are full of your own opinions and theories. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" In that moment, the professor understood something that no university had ever taught him. True learning requires emptiness, not the emptiness of ignorance, but the spaciousness of an open mind. This is what we call in Zen beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh eyes, free from the weight of what we think we already know. During this same period, when the old Japan was dissolving into the new, wandering monks walked the mountain paths seeking truth. These mendicants owned nothing but their robes and begging bowls, depending entirely on the kindness of others. They embodied a tradition stretching back centuries, the belief that spiritual awakening comes not from comfort, but from complete surrender to life's uncertainty. One such monk was Gudo, who served as teacher to the emperor himself. Yet, despite his high position, he regularly left the palace to wander as a simple beggar. On one particular evening, rain fell in heavy sheets across the countryside. Gudo approached the small village of Takanaka, his straw sandals disintegrating with each step, his robes soaked through. At a humble farmhouse, he noticed several pairs of sandals drying in the window. When he knocked, a weary woman answered. Seeing his condition, she not only sold him dry sandals, but invited him to spend the night. Inside, Gudo immediately sensed the family's distress. The woman's eyes were red from crying, the children huddled quietly in the corner, and a heavy sadness filled the room like thick smoke. When Gudo asked what troubled them, the woman's story poured out. Her husband was a gambler and drunkard. When he won, he became violent in his celebrations. When he lost, he borrowed money they didn't have. Sometimes he disappeared for days, leaving them wondering if he was alive or dead. "I will help him," Gudo said simply. He gave the woman money and asked her to buy wine and food, then retire for the night. "I will wait here." Near midnight, the husband stumbled home, reeking of alcohol and defeat. "Wife," he bellowed, "bring me food." "I have food for you," came Gudo's calm voice from the shadows. "I was caught in the rain, and your generous wife offered me shelter. In gratitude, I bought wine and fish. Please, share them with me." The drunk man was delighted. He drank the wine and ate heartily, then collapsed onto the floor. Gudo sat beside him in meditation through the entire night, like a guardian watching over a troubled child. When morning came, the husband woke, with no memory of the previous evening. "Who are you?" he demanded, seeing the monk beside him. "I am Gudo of Kyoto, traveling to Edo," the monk replied peacefully. The man's face went white. Gudo, the emperor's own teacher. He had shared his table with one of the most revered masters in all of Japan. Shame crashed over him like a cold wave. "Master, please forgive me. I am not worthy of your presence." Gudo's eyes sparkled with compassion. "Everything in this life is impermanent," he said gently. "Life is brief. If you continue gambling and drinking, you will have no time for anything meaningful, and your family will continue to suffer. But this moment, this very moment, you can choose differently." The man began to weep. For the first time in years, he saw his life clearly. "How can I ever repay you for this teaching?" "Let me carry your things part of the way," the man insisted when Gudo prepared to leave. After 3 miles, Gudo told him to return home. "Just 5 more miles," the man begged. This happened again and again. The man couldn't bear to leave the presence of such unconditional acceptance. Finally, the man declared, "I will follow you for the rest of my life." True compassion, Zen teaches us, doesn't judge or lecture. It simply offers presence. Gudo could have scolded the drunkard, could have preached about the evils of gambling. Instead, he offered wine and companionship. Sometimes the most profound teaching happens not through words, but through the radical act of meeting someone exactly where they are. In the same region where Gudo wandered, another master named Hakuin lived a life of such genuine simplicity that he became legendary. Hakuin belonged to the Rinzai school of Zen, which emphasized sudden awakening through direct experience rather than gradual study. The Rinzai way was like lightning, sharp, immediate, illuminating. Near Hakuin's modest temple lived a family who ran a food store. Their teenage daughter was known throughout the village for her beauty and gentle manner. Then one day, she was discovered to be pregnant. Her parents were furious and demanded to know the father's identity. The girl remained silent for days, enduring their anger and disappointment. Finally, unable to bear the pressure any longer, she whispered a name, Hakuin. The parents stormed to the temple, their faces red with rage. "You have disgraced our daughter and brought shame upon our family. What do you have to say for yourself?" Hakuin looked at them with perfect calm. "Is that so?" he said quietly. Those three simple words, "Is that so?" contained the entire universe of Zen wisdom. Not denial, not argument, not even explanation. Just complete acceptance of what the moment was bringing. When the baby was born, the angry parents brought the child to Hakuin. "This is your responsibility now." By this time, word had spread throughout the region. Hakuin's reputation as a holy man was completely destroyed. Students stopped coming to hear his teachings. Former admirers crossed the street to avoid him. Yet Hakuin showed no distress whatsoever. He took the baby tenderly in his arms. He begged milk from neighbors, found soft cloths for diapers, stayed awake through long nights when the infant cried. His care was so devoted, so completely without self-pity, that some began to whisper that perhaps they had misjudged him. A year passed. The young mother, tormented by guilt and unable to watch an innocent man suffer for her lie, finally confessed the truth to her parents. The real father was a young fishmonger she had been secretly meeting. The parents rushed back to Hakuin, their faces now burning with shame instead of anger. They apologized profusely, begged his forgiveness, and reached for the child. Hakuin handed over the baby without hesitation. His only words were exactly the same as before. "Is that so?" In Zen, we call this perfect equanimity, the mind that remains peaceful, whether receiving praise or blame, gain or loss. Hakuin had discovered what the Buddha taught, that our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from our resistance to what happens. When we stop fighting reality, even false accusations become just another cloud passing through an endless sky. These three stories share a common thread that runs through all authentic spiritual wisdom. Whether it's emptying our cup of preconceptions, meeting others with radical acceptance, or remaining peaceful in the face of both praise and blame, they all point to the same truth. The peace we seek is not found by changing our circumstances, but by changing our relationship to whatever circumstances arise. Notice how none of these masters tried to control their situations. Nanin didn't argue with the professor's theories. Gudo didn't lecture the gambling husband. Hakuin didn't defend himself against false accusations. Instead, they each responded with what we might call appropriate action, doing exactly what the moment called for, without the overlay of ego or agenda. This is the essence of Zen, not thinking your way to peace, but living your way there. Every moment offers us the same choice these masters made. We can meet life with an empty cup, an open heart, and a mind willing to say, "Is that so?" to whatever appears. In this simple acceptance, we discover the unshakable calm that has always been our true nature. In the bustling temple courtyards of ancient Japan, where the scent of incense mingled with the sound of wooden sandals on stone paths, the most profound lessons often came disguised as ordinary encounters. The master Bankei, whose teachings drew crowds from across the nation, discovered that true wisdom reveals itself not in grand proclamations, but in the quiet moments when our assumptions are gently overturned. Bankei belonged to no particular school of Zen. He taught what he called the unborn mind, the awareness that exists before thoughts arise. His talks were so popular that not only Zen students attended, but people from all walks of life, farmers, merchants, even priests from competing Buddhist sects. This diversity sometimes created tension, as different groups believed their approach to enlightenment was superior. One afternoon, as Bankei sat peacefully addressing a large gathering, a priest from the Nichiren sect pushed through the crowd. The Nichiren school emphasized devotion to the Lotus Sutra and could be quite militant in their approach. This particular priest was angry that his own followers had abandoned his temple to hear about Zen. "Wait just a minute," the priest called out loudly, disrupting the serene atmosphere. "Anyone who respects you will naturally obey what you say. But a man like myself does not respect you. Can you make me obey you?" The crowd murmured nervously. Here was a direct challenge to their beloved teacher. Many expected Bankei to engage in theological debate or demonstrate some miraculous power. Instead, Bankei smiled with genuine warmth. "Come up beside me and I will show you," he said gently. The priest, his pride now committed to the confrontation, pushed his way through the seated listeners to the front. He stood beside Bankei, arms crossed, waiting for whatever trick the Zen master might attempt. "Come over to my left side," Bankei requested pleasantly. Without thinking, the priest stepped to the left. "Actually," Bankei continued conversationally, "we might hear each other better if you were on my right side. Please step over here." Again, the priest complied automatically. Bankei's eyes twinkled with kindness. "You see," he observed gently, "you are obeying me perfectly. I think you are actually a very gentle person. Now please sit down and listen." The priest found himself sitting cross-legged on the ground, his anger completely dissolved. In less than a minute, without argument or force, Bankei had demonstrated something profound about human nature. Beneath our defensive postures and competitive attitudes lies a natural willingness to cooperate and learn. This story reveals what Buddhists call skillful means, the ability to respond to each situation with exactly the right approach. Bankei didn't fight fire with fire. He didn't match aggression with aggression. Instead, he met the priest's challenging energy with such disarming gentleness that the man's defensiveness simply melted away. In our daily lives, we encounter challenging people regularly: the difficult coworker, the argumentative family member, the stranger who cuts in line. Our usual response is to meet their energy with matching intensity. But Bankei shows us another way. What if we responded to aggression with curiosity, to demands with kindness, to challenges with genuine interest in the person behind the behavior? At the famous Kennen Temple in ancient Kyoto, where cherry blossoms fell like snow in spring and autumn maples painted the courtyards red and gold, lived a master named Mokurai, whose name meant silent thunder. True to his name, Mokurai was known for his powerful presence and his demanding teaching style. He never made things easy for his students, believing that authentic awakening required complete dedication. Among his many disciples was a 12-year-old boy named Toyo. Each morning and evening, Toyo watched the older students file into Mokurai's private room for Sanzen personal instruction sessions, where the master would give them koans, those puzzling questions designed to stop the ordinary thinking mind. These ancient riddles, passed down through generations of Zen masters, were like keys that could unlock doors the rational mind didn't even know existed. Toyo desperately wanted to participate in Sanzen. "Please, master," he begged Mokurai, "let me join the others." "You're too young," Mokurai replied. "Wait a few more years." But Toyo persisted with the determination that only children possess. Finally, Mokurai relented. "Very well, come this evening." That night, Toyo approached the master's room with trembling excitement. He struck the small gong to announce his presence, bowed 3 times as he had seen the others do, and entered. Sitting in formal posture before his teacher, he waited in respectful silence. Mokurai looked at the small boy seriously. "You know the sound of 2 hands clapping together," he said. "Now show me the sound of 1 hand." Toyo bowed and returned to his room, his mind spinning. What could be the sound of 1 hand? He sat by his window, listening to all the sounds of the night. Suddenly, he heard the distant music of geishas entertaining in the pleasure district. "Ah, I have it," he exclaimed. The next evening, when Mokurai asked him to demonstrate the sound of 1 hand, Toyo began playing an imaginary shamisen, imitating the geisha's music. No, Mokurai said firmly. "That will never do. That is not the sound of 1 hand. You haven't got it at all." Worried that the music might be too distracting, Toyo moved to a quieter part of the temple. Night after night, he meditated on this impossible puzzle. One evening, he heard water dripping from the roof into a wooden barrel. "That's it," he thought. When he demonstrated dripping sounds to Mokurai, the master shook his head. "What is that?" he asked. "That is the sound of dripping water, but not the sound of 1 hand. Try again." Month after month, Toyo returned with different sounds. The sighing of wind through pine trees, the hooting of an owl, the buzzing of cicadas. Each time, Mokurai rejected his answer. The sound of one hand is not the sound of wind, or owls, or insects. Try again. Nearly a year passed. Toyo's initial excitement had long since faded, replaced by something deeper, a genuine not knowing that wasn't desperate or frustrated, but open and attentive. He had exhausted all the sounds he could think of, all the clever solutions his mind could devise. Finally, sitting in meditation one quiet evening, something shifted. Toyo stopped trying to find the sound of one hand and simply rested in the silence before all sounds. In that moment of complete stillness, he understood. When he next appeared before Mokurai, the master asked as always, "What is the sound of one hand?" Toyo remained perfectly silent. Mokurai smiled for the first time in their many months of meetings. "You have heard the sound of one hand," he said softly. What Toyo discovered in that moment of silent understanding is what Zen calls direct pointing, the recognition that reality cannot be captured in concepts or sounds or explanations. The sound of one hand is the sound of no sound. The awareness that exists before our mind divides experience into this and that, self and other, problem and solution. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of this story is how it reveals the nature of authentic learning. Toyo didn't solve the koan through cleverness or study. He solved it by exhausting his cleverness, by moving beyond his small self's need to have the right answer. In Zen, we call this great doubt, the willingness to not know so completely that wisdom can finally emerge. True humility, these stories teach us, isn't about thinking less of ourselves. It's about thinking of ourselves less. When the Nichiren priest stopped defending his position, he could finally hear Bankei's teaching. When Toyo stopped trying to be clever, he could hear the soundless sound. When we let go of our need to be right, to be special, to already understand, we create space for genuine discovery. The Buddha once said, "The whole secret of existence is to have no fear. Never fear what will become of you. Depend on no one. Only the moment you reject all help are you freed." This doesn't mean we should be isolated or prideful. It means we should approach each moment with the fresh openness of Toyo before he knew any sounds, the receptive emptiness of Nanin's cup before any tea was poured. In our achievement-oriented world, this kind of not knowing can feel uncomfortable. We're trained to have opinions, to be experts, to demonstrate our knowledge. But these ancient stories whisper a different possibility. What if our greatest wisdom lies not in what we know, but in our willingness to be surprised? What if the most profound learning happens when we approach each day like a 12-year-old boy hearing an impossible riddle for the first time? Every morning offers us the same choice these masters made. We can meet the day with our cups already full of expectations and assumptions, or we can empty them and see what fresh understanding wants to pour in. In this beginner's mind, we discover that every moment is our teacher, every encounter a chance to learn something we never knew, we needed to know. Deep in the mountains of ancient China, where mist clung to pine trees like whispered prayers and streams carved their patient way through stone, there lived an old woman whose story would challenge everything we think we know about compassion. For over 20 years, this woman had supported a solitary monk, building him a small hut with her own hands and bringing him food daily while he devoted himself to meditation. In those days, it was considered a great merit to support a spiritual practitioner. Buddhist communities understood that some individuals needed to withdraw from worldly concerns entirely in order to pursue awakening, and lay people gained spiritual benefit by making such dedication possible. This ancient tradition, called dana in Sanskrit, represented one of the fundamental practices of Buddhist life: generous giving without expectation of return. But after 2 decades of selfless support, the old woman began to wonder, what progress had this monk actually made? Had her years of sacrifice helped him achieve any genuine understanding, or had she simply been enabling spiritual stagnation? To find out, she devised a test. She approached a young woman from the village, someone known for her beauty and warmth. "Go to the monk's hut," the old woman instructed. "Embrace him suddenly and ask him what he intends to do about it. Then, return and tell me exactly what happens." The young woman agreed and made her way to the remote hut. She found the monk deep in meditation, his back straight, his breathing steady. Without warning, she wrapped her arms around him and pressed close, asking in a soft voice, "What now, Master? What will you do?" The monk's response was immediate and cold. Pushing her away, he replied in a detached, poetic tone, "An old tree grows on a cold rock in winter. Nowhere is there any warmth." When the young woman reported these words to the old woman, the benefactor's face darkened with disappointment and anger. "To think I fed that fellow for 20 years, she exclaimed. "He showed no consideration for your situation, no kindness toward your humanity. He didn't need to respond to passion, but he should have shown at least some compassion." That very day, the old woman marched to the monk's hut and burned it to the ground. This shocking story reveals something profound about the difference between detachment and compassion in authentic spiritual practice. The monk had achieved a kind of emotional numbness, mistaking coldness for wisdom. True Zen awakening, however, doesn't make us less human, it makes us more fully human. The enlightened heart responds to each situation with appropriate feeling, not with calculated indifference. What the old woman understood, and what the monk had missed, is that genuine spiritual maturity includes what Buddhists call skillful compassion, the ability to meet each being exactly where they are, without judgment, but with genuine care. The young woman wasn't seeking seduction. She was simply being used as a messenger. A truly awakened person would have recognized her humanity and responded with kindness, even while maintaining appropriate boundaries. In medieval Japan, within the walls of Buddhist convents where women pursued the same rigorous training as their male counterparts, lived a nun named Eshun. The life of a Buddhist nun required tremendous courage in a society that offered women few alternatives to marriage and motherhood. These women shaved their heads, took vows of celibacy, and dedicated themselves completely to the pursuit of enlightenment. Eshin was known throughout her convent for her sincerity and depth of practice. Despite her shaved head and plain robes, her inner beauty and spiritual presence were unmistakable. Several of the monks who visited the convent for joint meditation sessions found themselves drawn to her, though they struggled with feelings that conflicted with their religious vows. One monk, unable to contain his infatuation, wrote Eshin a passionate love letter. In it, he poured out his feelings and requested a secret meeting. Such correspondence was strictly forbidden in monastic communities, and discovery could lead to severe punishment or expulsion. When Eshin received the letter, she read it quietly and set it aside without response. She neither encouraged the monk nor reported him to the authorities. She simply continued her practice, as if nothing had happened. The following day, the master of the temple gave his regular lecture to the assembled monks and nuns. When he finished speaking and asked if there were any questions, Eshin rose gracefully to her feet. In clear voice that carried across the silent hall, she addressed the monk who had written to her, "If you really love me so much, come and embrace me now." The hall erupted in gasps and murmurs. The monk who had written the letter turned bright red, his secret exposed before the entire community. But rather than creating scandal, Eshin's bold honesty created clarity. By bringing the hidden into the light, she had shown both the monk and the community something essential about authentic, spiritual life. True practice doesn't ignore difficult emotions or pretend they don't exist. Instead, it meets them with such direct honesty that they lose their power to create suffering. What Eshin demonstrated is what Zen calls direct pointing, cutting through pretense and confusion with the sword of truth. Her challenge wasn't cruel, it was compassionate. She offered the infatuated monk a moment of such clarity that he could see his own delusion. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for someone is to hold up a mirror that shows them reality without the stories they've been telling themselves. In a small hut at the foot of Mount Fuji, where snow-capped peaks reflected in still mountain lakes and cherry blossoms bloomed briefly each spring like reminders of life's precious impermanence, lived a Zen master named Ryokan. Unlike many teachers who gathered disciples and established grand temples, Ryokan chose the path of radical simplicity. He owned virtually nothing: a few robes, a wooden bowl, some calligraphy brushes, and books of poetry. Ryokan embodied what Buddhists call voluntary poverty, not the poverty of lack, but the richness of needing nothing. His days were spent in meditation, writing poetry, and playing with village children who were drawn to his gentle, playful nature. Despite having no possessions worth stealing, his hut stood unlocked, open to all who might need shelter. One evening, Ryokan returned from a walk to find a thief searching through his meager belongings. The man looked up in alarm, expecting anger or calls for help. Instead, Ryokan smiled with genuine warmth. "You may have come a long way to visit me," he said kindly. "You should not return empty-handed. Please, take my clothes as a gift." The thief was completely bewildered. He had prepared for confrontation, pursuit, perhaps violence, But this response, treating him as an honored guest rather than a criminal, left him speechless. Ryokan began removing his outer robe, then his under kimono, folding each piece neatly and placing them in the thief's hands. "Please," he insisted gently, "I want you to have these." The confused thief gathered up the clothes and fled into the night, leaving Ryokan sitting naked under the stars. Rather than feeling violated or angry, the master gazed up at the full moon with pure appreciation. "Poor fellow," he murmured with genuine compassion. "I wish I could give him this beautiful moon as well." This story captures the essence of what Buddhists call unconditional generosity, giving that flows from abundance of spirit rather than calculation of benefit. Ryokan didn't give his clothes to reform the thief or to demonstrate his own virtue. He gave them because, in that moment, giving felt like the most natural response to someone in need. Notice that Ryokan's compassion extended beyond the thief to include genuine sadness that he couldn't share the moon's beauty. This reveals the heart of enlightened awareness, the recognition that all beings are seeking the same fundamental happiness, though most of us look for it in the wrong places. The thief sought security through possessions. Ryokan had found it through letting go of the need to possess anything. What all three of these stories reveal is that genuine compassion requires wisdom. It's not enough to be kind, we must be skillfully kind. The old woman showed tough love by burning down the monk's hut, forcing him to confront his spiritual stagnation. Eshun showed fierce compassion by exposing hidden delusions to the light of truth. Ryokan showed unconditional love by meeting a thief with the same warmth he would offer any visitor. In each case, these awakened beings responded not from rule or concept, but from deep attunement to what each moment actually required. They had learned what the Buddha taught, that authentic compassion sometimes looks harsh and sometimes looks gentle, but it always serves the deepest well-being of all involved. In our daily lives, we face countless opportunities to practice this kind of wise compassion. When someone cuts in line, do we respond with irritation or with curiosity about what urgency might be driving them? When a loved one makes the same mistake repeatedly, do we enable their patterns or challenge them with loving honesty? When someone takes advantage of our generosity, do we close our hearts or find new ways to give that truly serve? These ancient stories whisper the same truth. Genuine understanding begins when we stop seeing others as obstacles to our happiness and start recognizing them as fellow travelers on the path of awakening. Every person we meet is seeking peace, love, and freedom from suffering. When we respond to their seeking with the same wisdom that recognizes our own deepest longing, compassion flows naturally. This is the understanding that transforms not only our relationships, but our very experience of being alive. In the bustling port cities of Meiji-era Japan, where Western influence mixed with ancient traditions like tea, stirred into clear water, there lived a man whose profession required both immense physical strength and unshakable mental courage. His name was Anami, which means great waves, and he was a sumo wrestler of extraordinary ability. Sumo wrestling in 19th century Japan was far more than sport. It was a sacred ritual, connecting participants to Shinto beliefs about purity, strength, and the divine forces of nature. Wrestlers weren't merely athletes. They were spiritual warriors who channeled the power of earth and sky through their bodies. The greatest champions were revered like living gods, their victories celebrated in poetry and art. Onami possessed all the physical gifts necessary for greatness. His massive frame moved with surprising grace, his technique was flawless, and his understanding of wrestling strategy was so profound that he regularly defeated even his own teacher in private practice sessions. Yet despite these abilities, Onami faced a problem that tormented him day and night. The moment he stepped into the ring before a crowd, his courage completely disappeared. His hands would tremble, his breathing would become shallow, and his mind would fill with paralyzing self-doubt. Students who could barely challenge him in private would throw him easily when spectators were watching. The man whose name meant great waves became as timid as a small child, afraid of water. Wrestling matches in public arenas drew hundreds of shouting spectators, their voices creating a thunderous wall of sound that seemed to crush Onami's spirit. The more people watched, the smaller he felt. His reputation began to suffer, and with it, his ability to support himself through his craft. Desperate for help, Onami decided to seek guidance from a Zen master. He had heard that these teachers possessed insights into the workings of the mind that could free people from their deepest fears. Near his training grounds stood a small temple where a wandering master named Hakuju was temporarily staying. Onami approached the temple one evening, his massive frame making him seem almost comical as he tried to bow gracefully in the cramped space. He poured out his story to Hakuju, how his strength abandoned him the moment he faced a crowd, how his reputation was crumbling, how he feared he might never achieve his potential. Hakuju listened with the patience of someone who had heard similar stories many times before. When Onami finished speaking, the master looked at him thoughtfully. "Great Waves is your name," he said simply. "So tonight, stay here, in this temple, and imagine that you are those great waves." The instructions seemed almost childishly simple. "You are no longer a wrestler who is afraid," Hakuju continued. "You are those huge waves that sweep everything before them, swallowing all obstacles in their path. Do this visualization completely, and you will become the greatest wrestler in the land." After the master retired to his quarters, Onami sat alone in the temple's meditation hall. The space was dimly lit by flickering candles, and shadows danced on the walls like spirits from another world. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine himself as waves, but his mind kept returning to his fears about upcoming matches. At first, his visualization was weak and scattered. He thought about his wrestling technique, his opponent's strategies, his need to win matches to survive financially. But gradually, as the night deepened and the temple grew quieter, something began to shift in his awareness. He started to feel the power of oceanic waves, not as something he was imagining, but as something he was becoming. The sensation began in his belly, a rolling, surging energy that seemed to have its own rhythm and intelligence. As he surrendered more completely to this inner movement, the waves grew larger and more powerful. In his mind's eye, he saw himself as a massive wall of water rising from the depths of the sea. Nothing could stop these waves, not rocks, not beaches, not human structures. They moved with the irresistible force of nature itself, beyond fear or doubt or self-consciousness. As the night progressed, Onami's visualization became more vivid and consuming. The waves in his imagination swept away the temple's flower arrangements, crashed over the Buddha statue, and filled the entire building with rushing water. By dawn, in his vision, the temple had become nothing but the endless,